There comes a moment when silence speaks louder than any confrontation, when walking away becomes more powerful than winning the argument, and when a soul that feels deeply no longer chooses to suffer quietly. This is the moment a super empath rises, not to destroy with vengeance, but to dismantle illusion with truth. And in that quiet rising, the narcissist meets something they've never truly faced before: the end of their control. The super empath carries within them a profound connection to the unconscious emotional states of others, often far beyond what is spoken or consciously conveyed. They are not merely sensitive, they are attuned to frequencies that others dismiss or overlook. When a super empath comes into contact with a narcissist, something alchemical occurs. The narcissist, who functions by suppressing and denying the wounded, fragmented parts of their psyche, suddenly finds themselves confronted with someone who can see them. Not the illusion, not the performance, but the truth that lies beneath. The empath does not just reflect the narcissist's grandiosity back to them like most do. Instead, the empath becomes a mirror that reveals the shadow, the hidden shame, the self-loathing, the childhood wounds that were buried and disowned in order to survive. This unconscious confrontation is unbearable to the narcissist, for their entire identity is built upon an escape from these very elements of the self. The empath becomes, therefore, not only threatening, but dangerous, because they unknowingly challenge the very psychological structure the narcissist has crafted as a defense mechanism. This confrontation with the shadow is not deliberate on the empath's part. It is the natural result of their authenticity. Where the narcissist hides behind a mask, the empath embodies emotional transparency. They do not perform, they feel. They do not manipulate, they listen. This contrast begins to create a cognitive dissonance within the narcissist. The narcissist is used to controlling others by appealing to their desire for approval, affection, or attention, but the empath doesn't respond in the usual way. They are less reactive, more reflective. They ask questions that pierce through pretense. They observe inconsistencies. They sense disconnection between what is said and what is meant. The narcissist feels this gaze, this intuitive awareness, as if their secrets are slowly being unearthed, not through accusation, but through presence. This presence, over time, becomes intolerable. It is not loud, it is not aggressive, but it holds a mirror that cannot be ignored, and what it reflects is something the narcissist has spent their life avoiding: the vulnerable self, the part that was once rejected by parents, society, or circumstance, the part that felt insignificant, humiliated, abandoned, unloved. When the empath holds space for truth, the narcissist is pushed closer to confronting these old wounds. But unlike the empath, who processes pain, reflects on it, integrates it, the narcissist has no tools to deal with what emerges. Their entire identity depends on not knowing themselves too deeply. So instead of reflecting, they attack, they gaslight, they demean, they accuse the empath of being too sensitive, too emotional, too dramatic. But this defense is a mask for panic. The panic of being seen. The empath, through their quiet depth, strips away the layers the narcissist uses to hide. The narcissist's psychological structure begins to fracture. Their persona, so carefully constructed and constantly maintained, is threatened by someone who doesn't play along. And the more the empath maintains emotional integrity, the more the narcissist begins to spiral. The false self can only survive when everyone around agrees to pretend. The super empath doesn't pretend. Their very being disrupts the illusion. This disruption triggers rage, confusion, and projection in the narcissist. But Underneath all that is fear. Fear of being exposed, fear of being unloved once the mask is off, fear of being abandoned if the truth is seen. And the empath has seen it. The empath doesn't need to speak these truths aloud. It is the energy of their awareness that begins to destroy the narcissist's hold. This destruction is not violent, it is revelatory. The narcissist is forced to experience, however fleetingly, the presence of someone who is whole, and in that experience, they glimpse the hollowness within themselves. The narcissist may retaliate, may flee, may escalate control tactics, but the damage has already been done. The mirror has reflected the shadow. The wound has been felt, if only for a moment. And in that moment, the narcissist begins to unravel from the inside, haunted not by the empath's actions, but by the unbearable awareness of who they truly are, underneath the mask. The narcissist's psychological survival is anchored in their dependence on the false persona they project to the world. This fabricated identity is carefully curated to elicit admiration, attention, and obedience. It is not simply arrogance. It is a fragile defense mechanism that shields an insecure and wounded self from being exposed or wounded again. For this illusion to remain intact, the narcissist requires others to reinforce it continually. They surround themselves with people who mirror their false greatness, who comply, flatter, and submit. But when a super empath steps into their orbit, the dynamic shifts. The empath possesses a form of deep psychological immunity to manipulation because their sense of self is not dependent on external validation. They are grounded in emotional truth and spiritual integrity. They observe patterns, notice contradictions, and trust their intuitions. This inner clarity makes them immune to the narcissist's usual tactics. The super empath doesn't react in the expected ways. They don't praise without reason. They don't flatter. And they don't become addicted to the highs and lows the narcissist uses to control others. This non-compliance, quiet as it may be, becomes the narcissist's undoing. The narcissist is accustomed to extracting emotional fuel, what some call narcissistic supply, from the reactions of others. They provoke, they charm, they seduce, and they hurt, all with the intention of watching others dance around their emotional games. But the super empath sees these tactics not as power, but as fear in disguise. The empath does not confront the narcissist with aggression, but with silence, with observation, and with non-participation. The narcissist, realizing that their attempts to provoke admiration or fear are falling flat, begins to feel powerless. The very tools that once gave them dominance are rendered useless. The empath's refusal to engage is not passive, it is the assertion of truth. It reveals that the emperor has no clothes. The narcissist, exposed in their fragility, begins to implode. What truly disturbs the narcissist is the realization that the empath sees them for what they are, and yet does not fear them. The empath's neutrality becomes a weapon far more devastating than anger or revenge. It removes the narcissist's control over the emotional tone of the relationship. The empath holds the line, refusing to mirror the false persona or surrender to manipulation. They remain calm in the face of projection, steady in the face of gaslighting, and clear in the face of chaos. This causes the narcissist to unravel because they are no longer in control of the narrative. Their identity was upheld only through external reinforcement. Without it, their carefully constructed mask begins to crack. Over time, the narcissist will try more extreme methods: emotional baiting, love bombing, devaluation, threats, but none of these work on the super empath who has awakened to the game. The empath's ability to remain authentic and emotionally self-sufficient becomes unbearable for the narcissist. They can't comprehend how someone can see their darkness and still not be seduced or shattered by it. They cannot accept the existence of someone who knows them, truly knows them, and yet chooses not to feed the illusion. The narcissist needs obedience to thrive, but the empath offers clarity. The narcissist needs flattery to survive, but the empath offers truth, and truth, when it can no longer be manipulated, becomes the most dangerous force in the narcissist's reality. It is the force that erodes the false self, not through confrontation, but through refusal to pretend. And in that refusal, the narcissist is left alone with the very thing they've spent their life avoiding: themselves. The super empath holds an extraordinary capacity to feel, absorb, and reflect emotional pain, not as a form of weakness, but as a powerful psychological mechanism for growth and transformation. Unlike the narcissist, who views vulnerability as something to avoid, hide, or weaponize, the super empath leans into discomfort to understand its origins. This emotional courage allows the empath to experience pain not as a trap, but as a teacher. They do not externalize suffering or blame others for it. Instead, they sit with it, process it, and through introspection convert it into self-knowledge and personal power. This process is not immediate nor easy. It involves inner breakdowns, moments of deep self-questioning, and emotional clarity that often borders on spiritual awakening. But through this alchemical process, the empath becomes someone entirely different from who they were at the beginning of their entanglement with the narcissist. They become wise, they become aware, they become unbreakable. The narcissist, by contrast, cannot face their wounds. To them, pain is a threat to the false self. They see suffering as something to project onto others, to suppress, or to escape through control, fantasy, and manipulation. So when they witness the empath endure and evolve through suffering, something deeply unsettling occurs within them. The empath becomes a living contradiction to the narcissist's core belief system. The narcissist has spent their life believing that control equals strength, that emotional detachment equals power, and that the avoidance of pain is the key to survival. But here stands the empath, who has walked through emotional devastation and emerged stronger, more whole, and more self-aware than before. This alone becomes a form of psychological domination. Though the empath does not seek power, it simply emanates from their healing. This transformation in the empath does not go unnoticed. The narcissist may initially interpret the empath's resilience as coldness, stubbornness, or even rebellion. But soon it becomes clear that the empath is no longer emotionally dependent on the narcissist's approval, affection, or validation. They no longer react to manipulation or get pulled into the emotional whirlpools the narcissist uses to assert dominance. The empath is no longer emotionally starving. They have learned to nourish themselves from within. They have integrated their trauma, and in doing so, severed the energetic cords that once allowed the narcissist to feed on their confusion, fear, and self-doubt. This shift is existentially threatening to the narcissist. The empath no longer behaves as a victim, nor do they play the role of savior. They embody boundaries, clarity, and purpose. Their emotional intelligence becomes a protective armor and a sword of discernment. The narcissist realizes they are no longer dealing with the same person. What once worked, gaslighting, guilt-tripping, love-bombing, now fails to even make a dent. The empath may still feel deeply, but they are no longer ruled by their emotions. They are no longer accessible through weakness. Their suffering has made them wise, and their wisdom has made them free. The narcissist becomes powerless in the presence of this transformation. They can neither control nor predict the empath. They are haunted by the fact that the very person they tried to break is now stronger because of it. The empath becomes proof that pain, when faced, becomes power. This realization is intolerable to the narcissist because it exposes their greatest fear, that true power comes not from domination, but from self-possession. And self-possession is something the narcissist will never attain, because it requires them to look inward, to feel deeply, and to accept the very wounds they've spent their lives pretending don't exist. The moment a super empath begins to set boundaries, a quiet but irreversible shift occurs in the dynamic between them and the narcissist. Boundaries, to the empath, are not walls built from bitterness, but gates constructed from clarity. They are a declaration that one's inner world matters, that peace cannot be traded for chaos, and that love without respect is not love at all. For much of their relationship with the narcissist, the empath has tolerated emotional violations, subtle manipulations, and spiritual erosion, not because they were blind, but because they hoped to heal the damage with compassion. The empath often believes in the beginning that love can redeem the narcissist, but as the emotional toll becomes unbearable and the empath's awareness begins to awaken, they realize that love without boundaries is not healing. It is self-abandonment. This awakening compels the empath to draw a line. To the narcissist, this line is not just a limit, it is a threat. Narcissists thrive in spaces where confusion reigns and boundaries blur. They use emotional entanglement as a form of control, convincing others that to resist them is to be cruel, to leave them is to be disloyal, and to challenge them is to be irrational. But when a super empath begins to reclaim their emotional sovereignty, the narcissist's house of cards starts to fall. The narcissist's sense of power depends on their ability to invade, influence, and manipulate. Boundaries block this access. Boundaries demand accountability. Boundaries force the narcissist to face the truth. They are no longer in control. The empath does not need to scream, argue, or accuse. Their boundary is firm but calm. It does not come from a place of revenge but of renewal. It is the voice of the self that was once silenced, now rising to speak. This quiet resistance disarms the narcissist. They may react with rage, tears, false apologies, or even escalate manipulation, but nothing pierces the empath's inner resolve once it has solidified. The narcissist's tools, gaslighting, guilt, charm, begin to fail. The empath no longer seeks answers from chaos because they have found peace within. Their need to be understood is replaced by the need to be free, and freedom requires separation from those who cannot honor it. The boundary-setting process is not easy. The empath feels the pain of detachment, the ache of letting go, and the sorrow of watching someone they once tried to save spiral in response. But the pain of staying in a toxic cycle becomes greater than the fear of walking away. The empath, now rooted in self-respect, chooses healing over illusion, and with every boundary they enforce, the narcissist's grip weakens. The emotional hold begins to disintegrate. The narcissist is left grasping for the old control, but the game no longer works. The empath has changed the rules, not through retaliation, but through self-realization. This newfound strength in the empath exposes the narcissist's deepest vulnerability, their dependence on domination. When domination no longer works, when emotional reactions are no longer triggered, and when access is denied, the narcissist is forced to confront the emptiness beneath the control. The empath, by simply refusing to be ruled, becomes the one with true power. This power is not loud. It is not vindictive. It is quiet, rooted, and deeply unsettling to someone who has only known how to manipulate, not how to connect. The boundary becomes a mirror, showing the narcissist not only the loss of the empath, but the absence of themselves. They are left outside the gates, not just of a relationship, but of the emotional reality they could never enter to begin with. And the empath, having reclaimed their space, finally breathes in truth, no longer shackled by illusion. When a super empath finally walks away from the narcissist, they do not simply exit a relationship. They leave behind a psychological battlefield that forever changes the narcissist's inner world. For the narcissist, who thrives on being the center of attention, adoration, and emotional dependence, the empath's departure is not just a loss of supply. It is an existential failure. What haunts the narcissist is not merely abandonment, but the fact that someone who once understood them deeply and intuitively chose to leave after seeing everything: the lies, the manipulation, the emotional barrenness, and still said no. The empath's exit becomes a mirror reflecting the narcissist's powerlessness. No rage, charm, or guilt trip could keep the empath bound, and that truth, that someone could see them and still not need them, is intolerable. Throughout the relationship, the narcissist depends on illusions. They present themselves as powerful, superior, or pitiable, whatever serves their aim in the moment. The empath, initially drawn in by sincerity and compassion, often engages with the narcissist's potential rather than their reality. But as the empath evolves, sees patterns, and begins to prioritize their inner peace, their perception of the narcissist changes. They begin to understand that what once appeared as wounded death was, in fact, a manipulative void. What once felt like intensity was actually emotional chaos disguised as passion. This clarity leads the empath to make the most powerful decision they can make: disengagement. And once made, that decision strikes the very core of the narcissist's identity. To the narcissist, being discarded by someone who once provided deep emotional attunement is not a regular breakup, it is a psychic rupture. They are no longer just unloved. They are unmasked. The empath does not leave with drama or vengeance. They leave with calm detachment, a silence that screams truth. That silence speaks louder than any accusation. It tells the narcissist that their game has ended, their mask has fallen, and the person who once gave them infinite chances no longer finds them worthy of another. The narcissist is left not with closure, but with absence, an absence that grows heavier with time. This absence is not about missing the empath's affection alone. It is about missing control, missing the mirror that once reflected the illusion of their false self. The narcissist may attempt to fill this void with new people, new conquests, and shallow affirmations, but none of it replaces what the empath represented. Because the empath's love was not superficial, it was healing, present, and deeply nourishing. Losing that love after being seen for who they truly are becomes a wound that festers. The narcissist, for all their outward confidence, cannot forget the one person who exposed them without saying a word. That memory becomes an internal echo of failure. Every failed attempt at manipulation, every ignored message, every boundary the empath holds, becomes a reminder of what they lost and cannot regain. Meanwhile, the empath rises. They do not seek revenge. They seek recovery, and in that healing they thrive. The narcissist watches, often from a distance, as the person they tried to break becomes stronger, more vibrant, and utterly unreachable. This transformation is not just painful for the narcissist, it is humiliating, because now the empath becomes a living symbol of the narcissist's limits, their inability to maintain control, their failure to keep someone emotionally tethered despite every effort, and the breakdown of their illusion are all crystallized in the image of the empath who got away. The narcissist may never admit this pain, their pride will not allow it, but internally they carry the mark of that loss. The super empath becomes not just a memory, but a turning point, a moment of exposure, of unraveling, of reckoning. It is a silent destruction, not by force, but by withdrawal. The narcissist is left in the ruins of their false kingdom, and the empath walks forward, not with bitterness, but with liberation, and that liberation is the narcissist's deepest defeat. A super empath does not destroy a narcissist through rage, cruelty, or retaliation. They destroy them by becoming everything the narcissist cannot control: authentic, aware, and free. The empath awakens the narcissist's repressed shadow, sees through the false persona, transforms pain into wisdom, and sets boundaries that shatter illusion. And when they walk away, they do so with such unshakable inner peace that the narcissist is left to sit with the one thing they cannot manipulate: their own emptiness. What remains is not a victory in the traditional sense, but something far more devastating to the narcissist's psyche: irrelevance. And that is the quiet, lasting power of the super empath.